We're about to ask the question, who is buying Britain? Who's buying into Britain? I'm surprised we've got anything
Is
left
anything
to
British
sell.
anymore?
Anything, nothing. Anyway, the government recently expressed its concern over the UAE's stake in Vodafone. Is Vodafone British?
I don't know. The sell-off of the Telegraph newspaper has caused a huge amount of concern, and it is a hot topic in the House of Commons. Here's Conservative MP Alicia Kearns.
Yet we see a situation where a paper of record, the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator, the longest running magazine in the world and my personal podcast of choice, will be purchased by a foreign state. The concern here is not foreign ownership, it is foreign state ownership. And in this situation, you cannot separate sheikh and state.
Sheikh and state. Can you separate those? This even concerned Isabel at the start of the week. She opened up her Daily Telegraph newspaper and she...
It was the Times,
was it the Times? And what did you find out?
It was the Sunday Times. Oh, well, it was all about the Ivy chain. Obviously, the original Ivy in the centre of Soho is a big sort of showbiz hangout, but it's come out as a franchise and it's very popular up and down the country. You've got the Ivy Age, you've got the Ivy restaurant chain. It's up for sale, or the largest stake in it by the British billionaire. And of course, who are they approaching? The Saudis, who already are being approached to bail out Heathrow, who already own Newcastle. Apparently, they've taken a huge stake in the Rocco Forte hotels.
They're buying
Do we
golf.
want more Saudis?
They're looking to buy darts as well. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Foreign investment helps the economy grow, but some believe that we are losing our Britishness, whatever that is, by doing so. I mean, honestly, what is British anymore? I really don't know.
Well, there are lots of British brands that still exist.
Like?
Don't ask me.
Burberry.
All the ones that have the royal crest. I mean, I'll tell you a man who might know about all this. Michael Cole. Of course, he famously worked for the, not for the royal family, as a...
He sold out as well. He did.
You were a royal correspondent for a great many years, but then you worked for Mohammed Al Fayed at Harrods, which is why we've asked you for this debate.
But it's not new. It's not new, Michael, is it?
No, indeed. Good morning, Isabel. Good morning, Eamon.
Good morning.
The thing is, the British stock market is open to everybody, like the Ritz Hotel. If you've got the money, you can buy the shares, and ultimately you can take control of any British listed company. This is nothing new. It's been going on for years. When you think about newspapers, it was 1969 that Rupert Murdoch bought the News of the World, then the Sun, then the Times and the Sunday Times. And that company today is News Corp. At the time he was Australian, now he's an American citizen. Our oldest newspaper, our oldest Sunday newspaper, The Observer, was owned by an American oil company, Atlantic Richfield, before it was bought by Tiny Rowland. His mother was Dutch, his father was German. He spent most of his life in Africa, and he was memorably described by Edward Heath when he was Prime Minister as the unacceptable and unattractive face of capitalism. If you go back further, Max Aitken was a Canadian. He came here. He set up the Daily Express and the Sunday Express and the Evening Standard, and he became Lord Beefbrook.
But just finally and briefly, we've got to get Russell in here as well. Does anybody care, really, Michael? That's the thing. Does anybody care who owns it? I mean, you were there, Mohammed Al Fayed. After a while, did anybody care that he owned it or not?
No, they care about whether it's well run. I mean, some of Mohammed and his brother were there for 25 years, and by general consensus, they did an extremely good job and revived the department store business, and it was a huge asset to this country, now owned by the Qataris.
Well, somebody who does care, Russell Quirk, he also joined us this morning. He thinks we need to stop all these sell-offs, and I suppose, you know, it might have saved some of these British institutions from disappearing altogether if we didn't have foreign investment, but you worry about that.
Yeah, I do, Isabel, and I think it's somewhat ironic that back in the day we used to own everything, didn't we? British Empire and all that, and now we own pretty much precisely nothing, as you've just been discussing. But I do think that there's a difference between, I guess, the flattery of foreign companies wanting to buy Harrods or a football club or indeed perhaps a water company. I think the more sinister progress now, though, rather than it being a matter of sheer patriotism to try and protect British interests, The big issue now is states trying to buy and control parts of Britain, whether that's our nuclear power, as we saw with the Chinese, whether that's our telecoms, which we saw with Huawei and 5G, and now our media. I think it's one thing Rupert Murdoch, independently and, in all good faith owning a media company, because he's not a state. He hasn't got malice aforethought in his mind. He doesn't want to seek to bring Britain down by way of actually manipulating the media, as we could argue that certain countries, particularly terrorist states, might want to do. So I think we need to be very, very careful that we don't end up with infrastructure, really important parts of Britain's infrastructure, taken over by troublesome countries.
Michael, can I ask you, the Queen famously used to love going to the Ritz, didn't she? And I know this just from watching The Crown and how she allegedly had a wild night there at the end of the Second World War. But is the Ritz really what it used to be now under foreign ownership? I don't know.
Certainly the Queen, when she was abroad and at all times, wanted to drive British. And of course, sometimes that meant driving around in a Ford. And of course, a Ford is an American company. I think, as the previous speaker said, it is flattering. People see this country, although we criticize it, as a very strong, stable and safe place in which to invest. Now, some of these interventions are unwelcome. A football club not too far away from Amman there has a controversial majority owners who are foreigners. That doesn't go down with everybody. But across the same city, people are terribly pleased about the people from Abu Dhabi owning Manchester City and what they've done for them. It all depends upon the people, how it's done, and the spirit in which it's done. You can argue that Kraft's takeover of Cadbury has not been welcome, it has not been successful.
Ruined it.
But British children think that Kellogg's cornflakes come from Manchester. They're American. They think that Heinz tomato soup is terribly British. It's American. Marmite was a Swiss invention. They think that's British. Fish and chips was brought here by Jewish immigrants from the Baltic, and it's totally kosher. You won't find any mention of fish and chips in Dickens or earlier writers, Thackeray and people like that, because it didn't get here until the turn of the century when the Jewish immigrants brought in perfectly kosher fish and chips, and they sold it on the corner in the East End, wrapped up in newspaper. Because they couldn't
a school day.
Especially with Michael.
Things you learn. Absolutely incredible. Russell, and of course we alluded to the utility companies, and Michael is absolutely right as to people simply care about how well something is run, and the utility companies are a perfect example of how unwell things are run, how really awful they are run. What would you like to say in conclusion?
Well, a couple of things really. I think, first of all, there needs to be a limit on things that could be to our detriment being owned by foreign states. So, imagine if all of our power was turned off, or, our communications networks because of a rogue state. The other thing I'll say, slightly tongue-in-cheek, is that the only thing I think we should sell off, perhaps to the North Koreans, is the post office, because then it might end up being a bit more honest.
OK, gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. We've got to sell you two off, but thank you for your contribution today, Michael Cole and Russell Quirk.
Thank you.